In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Creps, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 6th episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Creps. Today's episode is going to be covering two different issues of the OSINT Newsletter, issue number 82 and issue number 83. Issue number 82 is specifically for beginners, and it's a part of a new series that we're rolling out bi-weekly, where we're going to be publishing free content specifically tailored to beginner investigators, people that are probably less than a year of experience. And then every other week, and in typical fashion, we're going to be publishing a regular episode of the OSINT Newsletter where we cover the news, tools, tactics, and techniques across the industry, as well as more advanced concepts that you may find in the paid version of the newsletter. With that in mind, one other thing that I wanted to call out is if you aren't already subscribed, go ahead and head on over to osintnewsletter.com and subscribe to the newsletter. Also, make sure to follow us on social media. The two areas that we're probably the most frequently posting on is going to be LinkedIn and Twitter. So go ahead and check us out on there. Make sure to follow both the OSINT Newsletter and the OSINT Podcast. They're separate accounts, and there's going to be different content for both of those different publications. All right, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to be covering is the OSINT Newsletter issue number 82. This one is titled Dorking for Dummies, Search Engine OSINT that Goes Beyond Google. And like I mentioned in the introduction, this is the first of its kind. It's a newsletter specifically tailored to beginner investigators. And the 4 different areas that it covers is search operators, going beyond Google, a case study, and key takeaways. Now, one thing I did want to call out is that if you missed the issue before this one, it is issue number 81. And this is where we talk about integrating LLMs into the intelligence cycle. This is part of a normal OSINT newsletter publication where you have the 3 OSINT news topics, as well as 3 different tools, followed by some really interesting paid content. If you missed that one, go ahead and make sure to go check it out. It's osintnewsletter.com/81. But if you prefer to listen, there's also that content that's going to be covered in episode 5, the issue before this, called OSINT is Growing Up. Now, getting straight into the topic, we have Dorking for Dummies, search engine OSINT that goes beyond Google. So typically when you think about Google Dorking, it's right in the name, you think about Google. However, there's a variety of other different search engines that are worth checking out. And if you're a beginner user of open source intelligence or just new to the field, many people will just go to Google, or nowadays they'll just go directly to LLMs and search for content there. Now, what's important to call out here is that different search engines have different algorithms of how they index their content. So some of the stuff that you'll find on the first couple pages of Google will not appear on the first couple pages of other search engines like Bing, Yahoo, or Yandex. Now, most people are using Google nowadays, but sometimes content can surface up that is a little bit more interesting or relevant to your use case in other search engines. So you want to make sure that you're checking out those different search engines as well. And there's a variety of different tools that are out there that help you sort of expedite that. Now, this issue covers some of the basics. And once again, this is sort of designed with the beginner investigator in mind. So it does cover sort of the search operators that are universal across different search engines, such as the site operator, file type operator, in title, in URL, IP for Bing only, which is interesting, and then the contains operator, which is also for Bing only. Now, here's something that's very interesting to call out directly from the beginning is that many times people try to use the same operators for every single search engine. Some of the operators that Google offers won't work on other search engines, and some of the stuff that other search engines have may be operators that Google used to have, but they no longer support. The ones that I frequently use are the site operator and the file type operator. A lot of times you get really, really useful content that's specifically in a type of file, such as a PDF, a CSV, but I've also been looking into other more niche file types recently, like PCAPs, for example, MIB files, things like that that are more specific to cybersecurity or asset-related OSINT investigations. But one cool thing that I wanted to call out is that the IP operator is very cool on Bing. So if you have a specific IP address and you're looking to see if it matches any domains, If you put that IP address into Bing, it'll show you all the domains that are associated with that. That's typically something that is a little bit more advanced, and there's other ways of doing that, such as finding those IPs on Shodan, maybe looking at the favicons that are associated with those, and then mapping those favicons to other domains. This is a cool way of doing that without having to have an advanced skill set. And this newsletter specifically for those who may not have that skill set. Now, what I love about this particular issue is that there's a case study that's associated with it. In this case, it's the fake job scam. So let's say you're browsing around LinkedIn and you see a very convincing job posting for a tech company, or maybe a recruiter's reached out to you with a job posting asking if you're interested. Everything looks good, but it sounds a little bit too good to be true. So now you have a couple different skills in your arsenal, a couple different methods to maybe validate whether or not this company is legit. The first thing you can do is you can check out the domain name that's listed on the company page, run the site operator and your search engine of choice. And if there's nothing matching that domain, or maybe it's a park domain, obviously that's a major red flag. However, you can also find all the different posts on that particular website that are associated with that domain. So it might be the first place to start, just getting a general scan of what's indexed on search engines from the domain. The next thing is checking the images, right? So a lot of search engines have a reverse image search tool that's baked in to the search engine capabilities. You run a reverse image search on the recruiter's profile photo, and maybe you find that it's a stock photo, or maybe that you find that it's associated with some type of AI generated content. Another thing you can do as well is you can maybe reverse image search the logo of the website and see if it matches anything that might be scam related, or maybe it's legitimate. Then you can check out LinkedIn and see if there's any employees of the company. A lot of times if people are operating a scam, they'll at least try to make it look legitimate. And so to add a couple employees to the LinkedIn profile, you can use a variety of different search operators to investigate those employees. You can search the site :linkedin.com in URL, the company name. So let's say that you have employees, but they're not actually listed. It says that they're all anonymous or you can't see them. You can use a variety of different dorks to find those in search engines instead, where the name will actually be illuminated in the search results, but blocked on LinkedIn. So there's just a couple basic examples of how you can take something that's very basic, like a job posting, and use a couple different beginner OSINT methods to get a little bit more clarity on what you're looking at. You can look at the domain is legitimate. You can look to see if the recruiter is legitimate. And then you can maybe investigate a couple different employees and see whatever content you can find that lets you know whether or not you should move forward or not with this particular opportunity. So definitely go ahead and check out issue number 82 if you're a beginner to the open source intelligence space. Again, it's osintnewsletter.com/82. It's a free issue. Obviously, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the publication, but there's not going to be any paywall or anything on this particular piece of content. All right, let's move on to issue number 83 of the OSINT newsletter. And this is going to be your typical version of the OSINT newsletter. We're going to cover 6 different topics, 3 pieces of news, 3 different tools, and then we're going to be covering what's in the paid content. I'm actually really excited about this one because this is something I've been trying to do for a really long time, and I finally had the excuse to do it. So the 6 main areas, just as a high-level overview, is OSINT to train AI. This is an article that really changed how I think about open source intelligence in relation to AI, and it sort of brought something that was obviously in front of my face the entire time to light and changed my perspective a little bit. Then we're going to be talking about a new method for Google Maps, or I guess not a new method, but a method that was shared online about finding more information about Google reviews on the Google Maps. And then we're going to be talking about a new OSINT newsletter that's available, and it's probably going to be from a name that sounds familiar if you listen to this publication or you read. And then we're going to be talking about a couple different tools: Discord OSINT, Domain OSINT, and then Localized OSINT, which is how to find information that's specific to an area of interest rather than just relying on whatever the algorithms give you directly in search engines. So let's go ahead and get started. The first piece of content is called "The Future of Intelligence is Open." Now, the first thing that took me about this article was that it's written by Foreign Policy, which is a pretty major publication. I'm starting to see a trend here where a lot more mainstream publications are talking about open source intelligence. It sort of started as like Medium posts, LinkedIn posts, a couple of niche blogs, some of the stuff I was putting out, a couple other people that are in the OSINT space. Then you start seeing it on minor publications, maybe not mainstream publications, but things that people do read, but they're not like mainstream news. Recently, I've been seeing it in stuff like foreign policy. I've been seeing stuff on like mainstream US sources like CNN and Fox News, and also more global stuff like Al Jazeera and Associated Press. But in this particular article, they talk about how open source intelligence is more relevant now than ever because of the need to build LLMs and having specifically tailored content to make sure that the information that's going to be training the LLMs is relevant. Now, one of the things that made me think about this was that LLMs are probably trained, and when I think about LLMs, I'm thinking about like Llama, Gemini, GPT, etc. They're probably trained on just all the information they can possibly get from search engines, maybe social media sites, maybe video websites like YouTube and Rumble and things like that. But one of the things I was wondering, and I haven't really found any evidence for this, is are there any LLMs, like big mainstream ones, that are going to be trained on content that's a little bit harder to get, like the stuff you find in Telegram channels, maybe Telegram groups, Discord servers, maybe inside of chat rooms, things like that. And when we think about open source intelligence and what comes next, I think a lot of this is going to be like, we need LLMs that have very niche specific context. We need to be able to ask about terrorism use cases, about counter narcotics use cases, about all these different things that typically are only going to be found in weird places. And weird places are going to be places like 4chan, 8chan, if that's even still running, Telegram channels, things that I mentioned before. And I don't think that there's any LLMs that are sucking up this data at scale. Now, I've worked at a couple companies in the past that specialize in collecting and aggregating this information, and I'm sure that they're up to building LLMs on top of that. But I'm pretty sure that they're sort of baking in off-the-shelf LLMs and having them reference the content rather than building LLMs themselves, mostly because it's going to be very resource intensive. I could be wrong there, but that's probably what's going to be happening. It's like chatbots that are on top of data lakes instead of chatbots that are trained specifically on them. This is an area that I think is going to be very relevant and something that I'm excited to see that's out there. I would love to be able to interact with a chatbot that has very, very hard to find content that it can give me illumination on. And the first things that come to mind are probably going to be Telegram and Discord. So definitely go ahead and check that out. That's the first post in the news section. I did include a link to a no paywall version. If you try to read this on foreign policy, I think they hit you with a paywall, especially if you have ad blockers on. Somebody did archive it, so thank you, whoever that was. And so the no paywall version is going to be the one that was archived on, I believe, the Wayback Machine. All right, the next piece of content is finding the exact date and time that a Google Maps review was posted. Now, this is a very common use case if you're doing person search for open source intelligence investigations. And I did this a lot with missing persons investigations. I did this a lot when I worked protective intelligence, when we were looking at individuals that were people of interest. But a lot of times you might find a profile for somebody on Google. You have their Gmail account. You can use enterprise tools or maybe some free methods to turn that Gmail into a profile, a first and last name and an image. You can then find Google reviews that are posted by that person. And then based on the reviews, the next question is going to be, when was that posted? And in this case, Yoni, sorry if I've mispronounced this. People may also know them as Tactical OSINT. I've been chatting with this person for a while, so I don't actually know their real name though. But they go a step-by-step on how you can extract this information. And it's really only a 4-step process, but it does require a little bit more advanced methodology for people that may not be beginners. So at the beginning of this podcast, we talked about things that are a little bit more beginner friendly. This is probably somewhere in the intermediate zone, but you have to go into developer tools. You have to find the right API request that has this information. Then you'll be able to find a 16-digit number. And within that 16-digit number, you'll find the timestamp in microseconds of exactly when this post was done. Now, the reason why that's relevant is not only does the review give you a specific location of where that person was, but the date and timestamp tells you exactly when they posted the review. And I don't know about you, but I've never left a review like days after I went somewhere, unless I had like a really bad experience that was like a multi-day affair. I left a bad review, which I'm not a big person. I either leave good reviews or no reviews. But you may leave a bad review several days after if you're dealing with something over a long period of time. But if you're going out to like a restaurant and you leave a review, you probably were just there. And so a timestamp is actually really relevant to get behavior based information, to get pattern of life type information. So if you aren't using this method already, I highly recommend it, especially for those that are looking into individuals, because it'll help build a timeline of where this person was and when they were there. All right, the third topic to cover in this newsletter is a brand new OSINT newsletter that's out there. So a lot of newsletters have come and gone. Ours has been around for 3 or 4 years, I believe. And before that, I was doing a bunch of posts on Medium and on social media and even on my own website for a while. But we have the weekly OSINT newsletter from OSINT Jobs. We have Hank Von S's newsletter. We have Aidan Rainey's newsletter. I think the OSINT Insider is what it's called. But now Benjamin Strick has created a brand new Substack newsletter. And you probably heard me mention his name on this podcast a few times. It's mostly because he's always putting out high quality content. And when I first started creating content, there was a lot more people creating tools, creating articles, and creating a bunch of good information and sharing that online. A lot of that has dried up over the years, but Ben has definitely been consistent. And I love to see that he has a new publication. It's called OSINT Field Notes. I've recommended it on the OSINT newsletter. So for people who are subscribing, they'll probably get prompted to also follow that. But he goes in deep dives into the types of methods that I really don't cover that much. Ben comes from a journalistic background. I don't. I come from a military intelligence, a protective intelligence, global security type of background. So definitely a different lens on open source intelligence than what I have. And so I definitely recommend subscribing to it, checking it out. In this particular issue, which is called OSINT Field Notes, number 1. And what I really like about this publication is he covers 2 tools that he uses in his investigative workflow. He does a technical teardown of a specific use case that he built out, and then he goes into a case study specifically on China, how to tie this all together. So the first tool is called Global Fishing Watch Map, and it's a maritime tool that allows you to look at fishing vessels in your area of interest, and it gives you a variety of different metadata about each vessel. So if that's interesting to you, go ahead and give that a look. It's the first thing that he calls out in OSINT Field Notes. The second thing is called Bird's Eye View. It's a native feature within Bing Maps, and it's sort of their satellite imagery. It's high resolution and allows you to look at things from an angle, which is oftentimes very interesting. Specifically in this case, he shows looking at military aircraft at an angle on a runway, for example. Then he looks at a technical teardown. It's called DIY Power Grid Map. And he used LLMs to create an overpass turbo query that allows him to map all the critical infrastructure in a particular area of interest, that allows him to see a map of all the infrastructure in one pane of glass, giving him the insight to make different investigative decisions. So also very interesting and very cool thing to check out. It is not a new method to use LLMs to create an overpass turbo query, but I'm always interested to see the different use cases that people come up with, because there's a ton of very valuable data there. And the last thing he covers in this publication, we don't have enough time here to talk about all of it, but it's a case study specifically looking at China. So if you're interested in any of those things, go ahead and head on over to osintnewsletter.com/83. It's the last thing on the news section, or you can just check out OSINT Field Notes on Substack. All right, let's move on over to the OSINT tools section. The first tool is called DocsCord, and it's actually a very interesting concept. I always like to sprinkle in creative use cases for open source intelligence, and this is one of them. So this is something that I've looked into in the past, but not to the extent that this tool has, or the associated write-up and presentation that was done, I believe, at OSINT FR. But there's these things called UTM parameters, and anytime you've tried to share a link online, you've probably seen them attached to the end of a URL. And what it is meant to do is it's meant to allow the person who's published online to see where their traffic is coming from. So if you click on that link, it'll have some sort of tracker built in that says that for example, if you shared it on LinkedIn, it'll let you know the traffic came from LinkedIn. Now, not all UTM parameters are just for the source traffic. Sometimes they can give you things like device type. A lot of times they can give you a variety of other different metadata that may be relevant to open source intelligence. And what DocsCore does is it allows you to scan a Discord server that you're in, extract all the social media links that have UTM parameters built in, and then from there, you can investigate all of the URLs to see who's in a Discord server. So I mentioned this earlier, in the first news post about how a lot of interesting information is in Discord servers. A lot of times there's anonymous people that are on Discord servers. And if you are trying to investigate maybe nefarious activity within one, harvesting all that information out of there, you can find out if people are using iPhones or they're using Androids. You can maybe figure out time zones. You can maybe figure out a variety of other different footprints that they might leave behind that gives you sort of a high-level profile of the audience that you're dealing with within Discord. And then furthermore, you can look at specific users and pull information about them. So they may have an anonymous photo, they may have an anonymous username, they may not associate to any LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram profiles, things like that, but you can extract from the UTM parameters that maybe they live in Ukraine and they're using an Android device. That may not be like the smoking gun in an investigation, but paired with other information, contextual information, that could be very relevant information that's useful for your investigation. So DocsCore allows you to do that at scale, and it does require a little bit of configuration. So go ahead and check out the README on GitHub. But if you are a more advanced or intermediate user and you like to use GitHub scripts, this is definitely one worth checking out. And there's not that many that are being produced today. So when I see one that's very interesting, that's very powerful potentially, I always like to call them out. All right, the next one on the list, I'm not going to talk too much on because it's kind of enterprise, but they do have a community edition. I'm probably going to butcher the name of it, but it's called Validin. And what Validin is, it's similar to like domain tools or any type of tool that you've used that allows you to reverse look up a domain and get relevant information from it. The reason why I called this one out is a lot of enterprise tools have gone enterprise only, right? They used to have a free version and then a paid version, but then they've gone paid only. A lot of times they get acquired by a larger company, they paywall the whole thing, and they hope to get a lot of these users to convert over to the rest of their tools. But in this case, this tool allows you to do a variety of different domain investigations without having to pay for it because of the community edition. I believe you still have to apply for the community edition because they don't want to have, widespread abuse. But if you find yourself often doing reverse domain searches and a lot of tools have dried up, you may use tools like Hooksy, for example, that is still pretty good, but you may be using other things in the past that are gone now. Definitely worth checking this one out. It's definitely something that I'm going to add to my toolkit moving forward. It's the second thing in the tools section of the OSINT newsletter, so don't worry about butchering the spelling of it like I have maybe butchered the pronunciation. I have a link directly in the newsletter. All right, the last thing on the list is Google search localization. I always want to put in something that's a little bit more beginner friendly, and this is one of them. In this case, it's a browser extension. And what the browser extension does is it kind of creates a pop-up modal. The pop-up modal will ask you what location you're interested in. You then will put in the location of interest and your search queries and your desired language. And what it'll do is it'll construct a Google query for you, and it'll make it specific to the location that you're interested in. So maybe you don't want stuff that's relevant to your IP. Or maybe you're using a VPN or like a virtual machine or something like that, and you don't want something to lose context. A great example is if you're doing like a missing persons investigation and you live in Utah, but the missing person was in Massachusetts, you may want to change your localization to Massachusetts so that you can get information that's local to that area rather than local to your area, so that's a little bit more relevant. Go ahead and check this out. It's easy to install. Just go on. I use Chrome in this example. Easy Google Chrome extension, click it to get it going, and go ahead and make sure that you're adding context to your Google searches. If you go back to the issue number 82, the beginner-friendly content for how you can build Google search queries or any search engine for that matter, this is something you can add to that to add a little bit more advanced capability, something that's a little bit more beginner. All right, that's it for the free content in this issue of the OSINT newsletter. Again, make sure you subscribe, osintnewsletter.com, follow on social media, primarily LinkedIn and Twitter or X, if you're calling it X now. Let's move on to the paid content within this issue of the OSINT newsletter. It's been a while since I've made a tool for the OSINT newsletter. And in this case, I made a tool specifically for live webcams. The title of this post is Monitoring Live Webcams in a Single Pane of Glass. Now, in the past, there's been many scenarios where I was monitoring a live event, whether it was a natural disaster, a protest or a riot, a concert, anything like that, maybe even traffic that is an area of interest for me. And there's tons of live cameras that are online, whether they're on YouTube in popular tourist destinations like Times Square, Venice Beach, things like that, or they're just like traffic cameras that are placed all over a city that give you insight into what the highway conditions are like in an area. The biggest problem that I always had dealing with those live cameras is that every single source was on its own page. So if I was looking at a variety of different angles of a specific area of interest, I had to flip from one tab to the next tab to the next tab, or I had to do some weird thing where I put like 4 tabs in one screen and put it on a monitor somewhere and monitor 4 things at the same time. The biggest problem that I had is I wanted to see all of the webcams in a single pane of glass. That way I can see them all at the same time. So if anything were to happen, I could see all angles all at the same time. Now, I've been trying to make a webcam related tool for a while, and I didn't want to make anything way too robust because this can quickly become an impossible thing to get your arms around. There's thousands and thousands of cameras, and I really wasn't interested in indexing all of them and making some sort of enterprise tool. But what I built here was a web application that allows you to add in a variety of different webcams that you find on YouTube, see them all in a pane of glass, and then on top of that, add metadata to them, such as coordinates, so you can geolocate the video so you can have better situational awareness of the area that you're looking at. And in this particular case, I built a tool, and I take you step by step on how I built the tool. And now if you go back to the OSINT newsletter issue number 77, I talked about how you can set up VS Code and Copilot to be able to build your own tools, and that's exactly what I did here. And what I did was I started with a basic web application that allowed me to find a YouTube URL of a live camera, put it into this application, and see it on the page. And then if I found 4 or 5 or 6 different cameras for the same location, I could add them all together, and they would appear as a grid on one view. And that solved the first problem, which was, hey, I want to see all the different cameras in a single pane of glass. Now the next problem is now that I have all these cameras, I can't tell them apart. If something were to happen in one camera, which one is that, right? And if I need to document that one in a particular area like YouTube, a YouTube URL or something like that, I need to know which one is which. And so the second thing that I did was I allowed myself to edit the title and how the video visualized in the application, so I can differentiate the different videos that all might look similar. And in this case, over the weekend when I first wrote this, there was a No Kings protest that was happening at Duffy Square in Times Square in New York City. And I was able to capture the gathering of that protest on these webcams that all pointed towards Duffy Square in New York. And I had 4 different angles, a couple from Broadway and a couple from a couple different other streets. And I was able to see this protest from a variety of different angles. And then I went through and I labeled them based on all the different angles. I kind of just, in this case, I just used the name of the YouTube video to be able to tell them apart. But you could put any title that you want in this particular application to be able to differentiate the different ones that are on there. Once I had that, I had another problem, which was, hey, I just saw something. It's significant. Where's that camera at? And instead of having to do that after the fact, I did it ahead of time. So what I did was for all 4 different cameras, I used some basic geolocation to be able to determine where the cameras were. In this case, it was pretty easy. 2 of them had the exact address of the camera on the video itself. I think it was 1540 Broadway and 1560 Broadway. And all I really had to do was just do some basic spatial analysis to be able to figure out, okay, this is on top of a building. It's likely this building. I'm going to put the coordinate roughly on this building, and that's where I'm going to geolocate it. The other two were a little bit more difficult. They were also on top of a building, but they didn't have a specific address on them. So I had to use a couple different techniques. And what I did was I used Google Earth. I zoomed into Duffy Square. I found the different angles that I saw on each camera, and I was able to see them all in a single pane of glass, which was nice. So I could kind of, once again, spatially understand this a little bit better. I plotted all 4 points on Google Earth. I extracted the coordinates out of there, and then I added the coordinates as metadata to each individual webcam. So that solves the next problem. Where exactly are these cameras at? Now here's the problem, is once I have all of these cameras geolocated, it's fine if I have 4 different angles of Times Square. But let's say I start to use this tool and I start collecting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cameras, right? You never know when something's going to pop off, and you want to be able to have cameras at the ready and to be able to investigate if you hear that something's going on. But if you have everything in one application, it's all over the place, you need to be able to filter. Or you may be able to just discover what you have in a particular area. So once that I had all the coordinates that were on each video, I created a mapping view that allowed me to see all those coordinates on a map. And when I clicked on the specific icon that plotted where that coordinate was, it would create a pop-up for me for that specific video. So if I wanted to say, hey, I just heard that something's happening in Los Angeles, I pan on over my map to Los Angeles to see what cameras I have. They're all plotted on this map. I click on the one that's closest to where I think the area is happening. Bang, a window pops up, and I'm able to view that camera and see if the event is being captured on that camera within the map view. And what was really cool about this use case is it kind of got the creative juices flowing, and I figured out hey, what are all these problems? What's the workflow? What are the different things that I can run into as an investigator that I want to get ahead of and build this application for? But what I really like about this is it kind of steps you through my mindset in building a tool, starting with the problems first, solving those problems with the tool. And then what the best part about it is that I published this tool and I made it open source so anybody could use it. And I've actually been working on it since I published this newsletter and finished writing it to add additional features. So being able to change the grid of the video. So instead of it being 2 rows, you can have 3 columns instead. For example, 2 columns or 3 columns, switching from light mode to dark mode, depending on, what other type of applications you have to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. I added some editing features, and I just made it a little bit more user-friendly for people to use. And what I hope to do is that if this is something that's really useful for people, I only geolocated about 4 different webcams for this particular newsletter, but I found dozens and dozens of more of them on YouTube. And so if this is something that's interesting to you, what will happen is this application will store all of the coordinates and everything that you post locally. So if you download it from GitHub, it's just a web application, so you just have to open the HTML and everything will run. But once you start adding videos, you don't have to worry about all those videos being posted online. They'll just store in your local storage, so you can just create your own little, collection of different webcams and build out your own local tool. But if this is something that's super useful, I can maybe make a hosted version of it somewhere where I will add in a variety of different cameras that I find and geolocate them. And maybe if it gets really interesting or really useful, maybe we can crowdsource this a little bit and have people add in any of the ones that they find and add the geolocation for those as well. And so definitely go ahead and check out this issue of the newsletter if this is something that sounds interesting to you. Like I said, I step by step go through how I built the tool, and then I provide the tool at the very end. So yeah, definitely make sure to subscribe. But that's it. That's all I'm going to cover here. I don't want to spoil too much of the fun. You're going to have to make sure you subscribe and upgrade your subscription to be able to view the step-by-step. But I have videos that go along the way to kind of show you how I added one feature out to the other. And if you have any other ideas on features that we can add to this tool, definitely let me know. I should be publishing the latest changes with a couple different new user interface options here pretty soon, maybe a week after the publication of this podcast. But definitely let me know what you think. And if you have any ideas or any feedback for this podcast, don't hesitate to reach out. And one more time, like I said, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. I know it can get kind of confusing. We have the OSINT Newsletter, we have the OSINT Podcast. They sort of talk about the same thing, but they're in 2 different places, 2 different social media accounts. That's by design. We want to make sure that we have specific content tailored to both of those different social media sites. But make sure that you follow both of them. Like I said, LinkedIn and Twitter or X is where you're going to find most of the content. But also make sure to subscribe to the newsletter, because every single time I publish a podcast, you also get an update to let you know that there's a new newsletter out there. But I'm sure you'll also be subscribing to the podcast on wherever you listen, whether it's Apple, Spotify, etc. And I'm sure you'll be able to get notifications that way too. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you tune in for the next episode that'll be coming out in 2